It's story time with the Histories, with your hosts, Matt Marine and Jen Dumas.
Presented by Anchor FM.
All right, so here's the question I've got. In all the years I've been watching the videos with the students in class, we're getting ready for a test, whatever it might be, we got a review. Heimler always says, if you're ready to get your brain cows milked, let's get to milking them, or we finna milk them, or there's like he gets you that piece in. And the question I have is, A, what's a brain cow? Mm-hmm. And then B, you get milk out of the cow, but if the kids' heads are the cows, then you're getting the milk out. The knowledge is coming out of their heads. I'm lost. I'm lost.
We were lost because I'm thinking, well, if you're milking the brain cows, does that mean are you taking the stuff out of their brain and filling it with new stuff? Or are you just taking it out of the, you got to explain this to us.
I am aware of how logically flawed my catchphrase is. I would like to tell you that I sat around and pondered what could I say in every video, but I was recording in my first, probably 5-6 years ago. I'm recording world history videos, yep. And I'm literally in the midst. I'm in front of the camera. It's recording, and I'm like, you know what? I should have some kind of thing that I always say, and it feels like, oh, we're all together. And we all know this thing, and what is that? And literally, bam, milking. I'll milk your brain cows. And I'd love to tell you that was somehow calculated, but that gives you some kind of insight into my brain.
Spontaneity.
Okay, so to be fair, we were throwing around some in class this year. Like, all right, if we're not milking a brain cow, what farm animal are we substituting into this analogy to make it work? And all we could come up with was slopping the brain pigs. Yeah. Which is not, that doesn't have the same cachet.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. But I like it, and it's definitely a contender for a replacement. But at this point, I think there would be mass mutiny if I stopped saying it. But yes, I am exceedingly aware of the fact that it does not flow logically. But alas, it's what I say, and it's here to stay. So,
All right, perfect. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to Storytime with the Historists. This is world history told our way, full of humor, honesty, and hot takes. We're your hosts, Jen Dumas and Matt Barine. And for those of you who recognize the voice, you are 100% correct. We have Mr. Steve Heimler here from Heimler's History as a guest podcaster today. So thank you so much for joining us, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm exceedingly glad to be here.
Well, right. We are exceedingly glad that you are here as well. Now, today what we're going to talk about is one of my all-time favorite subjects, the Opium Wars, where China takes... Oh, poor China. I'm just going to say poor China. Before we get started, we do want to acknowledge our sources.
Well, we got a litany of sources here today, and I think maybe the best way to go through this is to check out the show notes. Once you get in, Heimler's brought his own bag of sources. We've got some stuff. As always, I think we just got a shout out there. Asia for Educators, through Columbia University. If you are looking to up your Chinese history game, your Korean history game, your Japanese history game, that's the place you want to go. And so we have drawn heavily for this series on Asia for Educators. And so we'll have a full list of sources, but I think we should pub that one for sure, because it's really great. We used specifically the Opium War and foreign encroachment from that series. Again, that's Columbia University Asia for Educators.
It's some good stuff. Let's get started. Let's just jump right into it.
Got to do context.
All right. So the last part of the Ming Dynasty, we talked about Portugal getting into the IOTN and the Ming not really loving it. But then the Ming end and enter the Qing Dynasty. But what we're really seeing from about 1500 on is the first time we have nations, not people, but European nations having direct contact with China. The first is going to be Portugal. They want into that Asian spice trade so bad because they want access to the luxury goods without having to go through the taxation system of the Ottoman Empire. And then eventually we'll get the Spanish in there as well, because the Qing start to introduce a taxation policy where they only accept silver for taxes. And so we're going to need to bring more silver into China in order to make that happen. Well, lo and behold, Spain's been hitting the shores of the Americas and been digging up those silver mines. And so now we're going to see Spanish trade with China because of the trade. And it was fine, I think, originally, because we know the Chinese attitude. You bring us the stuff we want, we'll give you the stuff you want. We're calling it good. No really cultural interactions. And if that had taken place, that would have been fine. But that's not what ends up happening, both with the Portuguese and the Spanish. Both the Portuguese and Spanish do begin some initial missionary activity, which China is not too fond about.
No, definitely not. And, I think that piece of, Chinese history, those traditional patterns, xenophobia, ethnocentrism really come to the fore here when we start thinking about Chinese trade in that post-16th century, post-1500s era, where China, coming off the Mongol invasion, coming off the Yuan dynasty, is looking to set back up as a power player, like we discussed in the last episode. At the same time, though, really wants to protect that homeland identity. And the system that they're going to utilize to control trade is this canton system, which involves a kowtow, which is a ceremonial, almost like crawling across the docks on your hands and knees, not allowed to look up at a Chinese trade official, and you're just delivering your wares. Crawling, like hands
Legit
and knees.
Crawling.
Yeah. Heimler, am I wrong? I saw you nod along.
Forehead all the way to the ground.
That
as far
I get,
as I know. Yeah.
And you're not allowed to look up. You look
Right.
up, you're getting thwacked. If not worse. And so China, like we said last time, China is back, baby, but they're back on their own terms. And for the Spanish in particular, through the 1600s, that's fine. They've got boatloads of silver, right? As Heimler might say, metric butt tons of silver.
Nice.
It is.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah. And they're taking it out of South America. They're bringing it in. And China's using this to reset its currency after it comes off of paper money. And, things are going well, but as Spain's influence starts to wane for a variety of different reasons, I think when we get into our 30 Years' War series, we'll talk more about Spain on the decline. We see England ascending. And there's a couple of different reasons here for this. And I'm going to have to be fast with this just because if I get into the weeds of European history, we'll never get out.
Oh, my God, it's so true.
However, let's just say that England did really well when it came to the end of the 30 Years' War. The decline of the European markets for wool in particular created a space for internal markets in England that allowed for both the production of wool, but also then the carding and spinning and creation of an internal market where people could buy the goods. And this starts to create a market system, like a proto-capitalist system. At the same time, you've got overseas colonial success in the Americas and the BEIC, the British East India Company, one of a variety of East India companies. You've got the Dutch VOC. I'm not going to try to say that. That is a career-destroying name. You've got the French East India Company. Everybody had an East India Company. The BEIC, through the wars of succession for Spain and then Austria, finds itself kind of in the catbird seat of trade in the IOTN. And then with the kind of curbing of noble power that happens in England after the War of the Roses, and then especially after the English Civil War, creates more of a protection for property rights. And so you almost have this perfect storm in England for economic expansion, and England's looking at a place where it can start to sell some more of its goods that it's creating internally, because again, there's not this large European market. Germany, like this nascent Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, they're totally destroyed after the 30 Years' War. France and the Dutch, they're everybody's falling victim to the mercantile sort of market protection movement, and China looks like a place you could go sell some things, and England's got some things, specifically textiles.
Yeah. First, I just want to interject. I don't think it would have been a problem for you mispronouncing, because you've kind of made that your thing.
Yep.
So I think you should have gone for it. But it is true. And I know the BEIC went into India at first to gain access to those, the Asian spice trade luxury products that they didn't want to go through the Ottoman Empire anymore. And so I think at first that was their goal. I think that goal is definitely going to change with the Industrial Revolution. Now it's more about, through the process of industrialization, especially if we're looking to China, that Britain sees China as a tremendously attractive, huge market, especially for textiles, right? And so that's going to only increase their interest in China. And so they are going to really bring these textiles in and try to sell them to China. And what was Commissioner Lin's, what did he call them?
They're like trinkets.
Yeah.
He calls them these little trinkets, things that people don't want.
Amused by, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's just garbage. China, and listen, China is. I say this in class all the time. If you were a betting person, you would have bet on China to be the continued global power through that period of early modernity and into the actual modern age. China just didn't want to, in a lot of ways, alter its cultural patterns and didn't want to participate in the system of global trade that is starting to coalesce around European shipping in a lot of ways. And, China had everything it needed. And in fact, when it comes to even the textile trade, China was in the process in the 18th century, in the midsection of the 18th century in particular, of taking cotton from its northern and central regions, bringing it south and starting to create its own cotton cloth. And this really upset the apple cart of the British, the BEIC in particular, because, we've got the average British household is spending 5% of its daily income on tea alone. And the major trade good going back to China from England was cotton. So you're trading cotton, you're getting back tea, or you're just moving hard currency and getting back tea. And this creates this huge trade imbalance. And then with the Chinese saying we don't even think we need British cotton. Well, all of a sudden you've got the Indian mills that are ever expanding, and the BEIC sitting on all of this potential wealth, but it's not converting into actual wealth. There needs to be a trade. And that the trade that's going to take place is going to be opium, specifically out of Bengal. And I think, Heimler, that gets us to you talking to us about the Opium Wars.
Heimler, can I ask you one quick question? Because when Matt said they spent 5% of their daily income on tea, I am pretty sure both you and I spend 5% or more on our daily income for coffee. Are you a coffee drinker, Heimler?
Oh, 100%.
100%.
And I would, the comparison is not lost on me. It's like, what? Okay, so suppose somehow, in some way, we, had the threat of no more coffee in the United States. I'd like to think we'd take the high road and be like, of course, it is, an addictive substance and we will, but no.
Absolutely.
Would we go to war over it? War? I don't know, but who knows? But yeah, I love, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating to me. And, y'all have to cut me off at some point, because not only is the narrative itself fascinating of the Opium Wars, but equally fascinating is the way the modern Chinese tell themselves the story about what happened during this century of humiliation, as they call it. And it tells an awful. Anyway, I don't know how far we'll get, but whatever. Yeah, you brought us up to this point, and it's not as though China was nationalistic and wanted to keep to themselves and have no foreign influence. It's not that as though they felt like that and whatever. Like they had the receipts for millennia. They were able to do this. It was no problem for them. It didn't cause any problems for them to have everybody kowtowing and saying that they were the greatest people in the world, and we are the assistant to the regional manager. You guys are great. We love you. That worked for them for a very long time, and to me, that's what is extremely fascinating about this story, is that this was embedded in their culture for a long time, made all sorts of sense, but at this point, it becomes a calculation that they just can't figure out. It becomes an assumption that ultimately leads to all sorts of problems to them. Because, like, okay, so you guys said in the last episode, China literally means, Middle Kingdom. Like the even the world maps today that Chinese children grow up learning, like China, right in the middle of the world, and that's really fascinating. And so then you look at like England and this little tiny thing, even on the Mercator distortion, making it bigger, it's still way smaller than like. And so to me, it just just looking at this, how in the world did this little tiny island all the way across the world have such a profound and lasting impact on this massively huge ancient civilization? I mean, it is an astonishing question that remains still open to me. So yeah, to me, okay, if we're going to tell a story, we got to have a protagonist, and we could choose any protagonist we want. But let's start with Qing, with Qing China, and tell the story from their perspective. So the inciting incident, of course, which we've already talked about, is the trade imbalance between Britain and the Chinese. Like, China wants nothing from them, and so the metric buttloads of British silver are going in to China and not coming back. So they solved the problem with opium. But interestingly, the way the narrative I've always heard is, these evil Western people introduced this poison to the Chinese people and caused all these problems and addiction and lethargy, and that's how they were able to take it over. What I was interested to learn is that there was already a very robust opium usage in China before British opium ever showed up, especially among the elite. And it was the British who came in and actually had better opium. And it wasn't like it's, at least in the beginning, it wasn't the refined opium that we would think of as like, morphine, heroin, like these powerful things. It was, they just laced tobacco with it, and that's how they started smoking it. And so, I mean, whatever. Kids don't do drugs, but
Definitely, this is a anti-drug podcast. Definitely,
that is correct. I'm not endorsing it, but it wasn't. It's, at least in the beginning, it wasn't nearly as powerful as those kinds of things. But regardless, it's illegal in China, and so this is going to cause a problem. But the way around that was that the British found out that Chinese merchants in Canton could be bribed, and so the trade becomes incredibly profitable. Silver begins flowing back to Britain, and truthfully, the situation was not really the object of much scrutiny or distress for a while. Then we get one of the main characters, a new emperor, Dao Guang. And again, somebody listening to this, and no, I cannot pronounce these things. I hope that's close.
You and me both. You and me both.
Okay, so feel free to correct anything I say improperly. But what I find fascinating about him is that he actually had a significant change of mind regarding opium. So, like, as a young man, he loved opium. He was very into it.
Soaking up every Saturday night.
Yeah, and twice on Sundays.
There you go.
And he actually, we have poems from him. He wrote poetry about opium's virtues. He's like, when you desire happiness, it gives you happiness. Like, he loves it. But by 1832, we see this complete reversal in his mind regarding opium. And that's because in that year, lots of things went very badly for China. There were droughts, there were floods, there were famines that resulted from both of those. And then add to all that, like, sort of the crowning moment for that was that Qing troops were routed in this like little minor dispute on the border, and it was reported to the emperor like, oh, they were smoking opium, and so y'all talked in the last episode about the mandate of heaven, and which, by the way, it's a parenthetical remark. What a marvelous system that is. I kind of love that.
Seriously, right?
It doesn't matter who's in charge. It just, what do they do? And then we can evaluate and like, are they failing or are they succeeding? And then whatever, you either lose it or you keep it. I don't know how well we could implement that here in the United States, but
I think it's worth a try. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I mean, we'd all have to be reading the same tea leaves, so
Yeah.
that'd be a tough one.
That's true. But through this podcast, I believe we're going to start. So this is where the movement begins. But anyway, so with that defeat, Dao Guang has nature conspiring against him. He's got these military losses, and he needs an explanation. He needs a scapegoat. And so he centers on opium. This is the problem. That's why those troops lost that minor skirmish, which they shouldn't have lost. And unfortunately for him, reading his letters, reading accounts of other people talking about the emperor, his real character flaw was that he was exceedingly indecisive. So he does agree to ban opium. But he's unsure of the steps to take. How do we work this out? Then we get our other major character. Enter Lin Zexu.
One of my favorites in history. I'm not kidding. His letter's the best.
Yeah, it is. Is Zexu or Z? Help me out.
I think it's Zexu.
Lin Zexu, I think.
Yeah. And Chinese or Mandarin has that marvelous inflection system. Yeah. So if it's like Zexu.
Yeah, right.
But whatever. I'm not even going to begin. Oh, thanks.
Better than me. Better than me.
Totally.
Well, that's the reason I'm here, just to be better than. But Lin, oh my gosh, he is in every way Dao Guang's opposite. Like where the emperor is indecisive, Lin is principled. He's unbending. He knows exactly what needs to be done. In fact, I think he earned a nickname in a previous post that was, I don't know the Chinese for it, but it was Lin clear as the heavens. Like that's people's understanding of who this guy is. And if you wanted to compare, I almost kind of think about Oliver Cromwell when I think about this guy.
Ooh, that's an interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, you cannot go off on another Cromwell.
This is not a Cromwell episode.
Just saying.
It's not. But like a lot more people know who Oliver Cromwell is than him. But like this sort of puritanical, character that goes all the way down, unbending, unflexible. So anyway, for every one of the emperor's question marks, Lin has a period. He knows what needs to be done. The opium trade must be utterly stamped out. And so, there's all sorts of plans or potential ways they can do this. And, I think one of them was, let's just execute everyone who's on opium. They start by focusing on the Chinese population, and they're later going to focus on the Canton merchants. But it's like, let's just execute everyone. And then they kind of pull back on that not because what a horrible thing to do, but because do you imagine how long that would take and how exhausted our troops would be and how much it would cost? I'm like, what? Are we not even talking about mass murder? Is that not even making the list of criteria to why we're not going to do this? But that was on the table. And so they ultimately decide to put pressure on the Canton merchants and to put pressure on the Chinese people as well. They, ultimately come up with sort of rehab system on pain of death. Like we'll give you a year to get off of it and you have to register. And if you don't by the end, we'll kill you then. Which I actually don't know how that went. I would be interested. I know opium continued after that, but anyway, that I think that's when we begin to see the real fatal flaw of the Qing leadership beginning to emerge, because it's like either because they can't or because they won't. I don't know. The Chinese the Chinese court, I should say, never really seems to properly understand the motives and power of this Western nation, these foreigners who they give very little account to. Like they by enacting this prohibition, they cannot understand what that might mean for British merchants and for the British crown. And so ultimately this inability or unwillingness or both is going to lead to their downfall.
Yeah, totally. I think this, when thinking about Britain right there, one of the things when I was reading about, this early stage of the conflict was, I think it's important to note in Britain in particular, opium is being described as God's own medicine. And you were talking about the Qing emperor writing poems about the grandeur of opium and everything else. Well, the same thing is happening in Britain as well. You've had the synthesis of opium into morphine, and it's becoming this recreational drug. And the BEIC and the British entire trade apparatus at this point in time is hoovering up the world's opium supply. So not only do you have this massive amount of opium going from India to China, you also have this mass amount of opium coming out of Turkey going into England, which is then making its way into the European markets and then to the Americas as well. I think that one of those indecisive miscalculation pieces right there that really should be highlighted was the degree to which England was starting to see the efficacy of the opium trade and expanding its power. And then again, not a European history podcast, I know that. However, England's coming off a huge amount of success in the Napoleonic Wars. There's a power vacuum in Europe right now to be filled. And he with the most gold is going to fill that power vacuum in a lot of ways. This is a pretty complex moment. And I think this is where some of that insulation of the Chinese, along with the lack of decisive action, really conspired against them in a way that, how could they know? But still, there was definitely a miscalculation here, it would seem to me.
Oh, yeah. And let us never forget, empires don't pay for themselves.
That is true.
With especially right on the heels of Britain's, acquiring India from the East India Company, we would tend to think that, the British Empire was massive and they were, industrialization and they're wealthy, but they got bills to pay. This is not cheap. And so with that miscalculation that you mentioned, also, it's there's this huge fiscal pressure to make up, their budget, which is in the red, for, acquiring India and then all the paying for the Navy and all the things. So there's a huge miscalculation. And so that's when Lin Zexu arrives in Canton and begins to bring the sauce. He reprimands the Chinese merchants for their complicity in the opium trade. And then he sends this letter to Queen Victoria. And Jen, I know you love this, so tell us about this.
Okay, so now whether Queen Victoria ever received this letter, we don't really know. Probably not. But just from a female perspective, I don't know if I've read a more condescending letter towards women. I remember the first time I read it, and I'm I just want to go back in history and punch this guy in the throat. It is so condescending. He talks about how, China is the celestial empire, the Middle Kingdom. And he goes on to talk about how China has been so benevolent to Britain by allowing them to trade, and that British products are literally mere trinkets or toys, and China could have them or have them not. But my favorite, and it just goes on as to why they don't want English products, why China is so awesome. And then this condescending language at the end where he's like, you can't possibly have seen this or you wouldn't let this happen. But just in case you didn't see it, let me tell you. And then he signs off something like, and I'll expect to hear your reply very quickly. And it was more like, you will do what I tell you to do. And this is where it's going to end. And again, going into your idea of that ethnocentrism and xenophobia, this is what China has always done and it has worked. And I'm sure Confucian attitudes played a role into the I can't even imagine the idea of a female. Anyway, going beyond that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love it. He's forgiving her for her ignorance.
Yes,
and by the way, make me a sandwich while you're at it.
Yeah,
Well, I think one of the things, I'm looking at the letter right now. He Lin refers to Queen Victoria as "O King." like 5 times in the letter. It's like, yeah, it's. I mean, he's gaslighting her for sure, right? Like that's what's going on here.
Well, okay, and I'm kind of jumping to the end here, but there's like, and even by the end of this war, right before they're going to sign the treaty, the emperor is still showing incredible ignorance of England and who they are, because he's asking like, wait, they have a woman in charge?
Yeah.
How is that possible? It's like, dude, look, read the room. Where are you? Like, learn something. Like you're anyway. That's going to be anyway. But and by the way, I know like I'm spending so much time here on the build up and the whatever to the actual war. To me, the war itself, the fighting is like, oh, okay, that's whatever.
They won.
And then the second Opium War, it's like, it's just sort of like a less interesting sequel, because all the action, it's the same action, same kind of, but all the drama is here in the beginning. So forgive me for spending so much time here.
I love it.
Lindsay Shue. Okay, so he sends that letter. He comes and makes his will known to the Canton merchants. And that's when we get the entrance of Charles Elliot. Now, he's the British superintendent of trade in China and is going to act sort of as Lin's chief antagonist. Interestingly, he personally agrees with Lin on the evils of opium. He's no fan of it, and actually thought that British dependence on the opium trade was reprehensible and ought to go. But, huge but, massive but, when Elliot is faced with Lin's demands to surrender all the opium and stop selling it, all that sort of thing. When he's faced with those demands and the threat of death to British merchants, Elliot is going to do what Elliot. I mean, he rises to defend his own countrymen. It's kind of like Robert E. Lee. He's like, I'm not a fan. I want the Union to stay together, but if we're going to separate, I'm going to fight for the South. Whatever. You take care of your own people, and that's kind of what Elliot does.
Yeah.
So Elliot refuses to cooperate with Lin's demands, and so Lin enacts a blockade of Canton. Now, Elliot's response to this blockade is it's got strokes of genius to it. So Elliot decides, okay, he surrenders like over 20,000 chests of opium to Lin. It's worth something like 2 million pounds sterling, which I don't know what the translation of that is, but it's a lot.
A lot of money.
It's like 1,400 tons, which I looked up. What would that be? It's like 110 school buses. If you could imagine. If you could imagine like a school parking lot full of school buses, it's 110 of those. That's how much opium was surrendered to Lin.
Wow.
But here's the problem. The problem is all that opium was the private property of the British Canton merchants and was their livelihood. Okay. So here's the stroke of genius. Elliot assures those merchants that the British government would assume that debt and then repay them. And so for Elliot, this is like a boss level move. Okay. So, prior to this moment, this was a conflict between the Qing officials and the private merchants in Canton. Now, this is a conflict between the Qing court and the British crown, who now owes all of this money to the merchants.
Well, that's like a real like wag the dog sort of move from him. Like he really like. I think you've got the two most powerful empires on the planet, like poised, and this guy manipulates the whole situation for the benefit of the merchants and in his country in a way that I didn't really appreciate that level of manipulation before. That's insane.
Yeah, he knew what
Yeah, well, and let us never forget that it's not like Elliot was texting Lord Palmerston back in
he's
England
like, hey,
to try to figure this out. No, he's a plenipotentiary. He's got the authority to deal with it, and he makes his own decision here to do this. And now all of a sudden, this debt belongs to the British government.
So what you're saying is he made this decision without really consulting the British government.
I am saying that, yes.
Nice.
Yeah. So what happens? Lin takes all that opium, 110 school buses worth, and burns it all. Okay. So he, seems to him, like after that, he burns it all, makes an apology to the sea spirits or gods. I can't remember exactly how they conceive of that, because, he's about to send a bunch of nasty stuff into their domain. But it seems for Lin, like now, and by the way, and the emperor as well, because we have their communication, it seems like the problem is solved. Like the affair is over. And we know that because Dao Guang offers Lin a promotion to another part of the territory, tells him like to finish this whole Canton opium thing and move on, go to your other post. And again, this is where we see both of these men seem to have no understanding of what this will mean to the British. They're the dang Middle Kingdom. Doesn't matter what it means to them. We are who we are. Anyway, so Elliot and his fleet retreat to the deep water ports over in Hong Kong. And that's when things start getting tense again, because Lin forbids the local Chinese merchants on the coast from supplying food or provisions to the British. And ultimately, Elliot moves his fleet in to break that blockade of the Chinese junks that were assembled there. They exchange fire, the blockade is broken, and that led to it. Technically, those are, the first shots of the war, but it's like this leads to diplomatic tensions like a year before the war actually begins, because again, England is very far away. They have to, send ships and communication. And so like the war begins like a year later. Mm-hmm. And on paper, again, there's no way that this little tiny island of a nation should stand any chance against this massively populous Chinese nation. But turns out, as we've already mentioned, the British had a trump card, and that trump card was industrialization. So, the British had industrial grade firepower, whereas the Qing relied on pre-industrial weapons like bows and swords and spears. God. Yeah, I mean, it was insane. And then the British, and then the comparison of troops and the numbers is kind of astonishing. The British only commanded like 7,000 troops in China, and the Qing theoretically had the world's largest standing army, at least on paper, which is amounted to something like 800,000 folks. But communication and transportation were slow in China, and many of those troops were engaged elsewhere in local disputes, of which there were many. See previous episode. Yeah. And long story short, battle after battle, British weaponry, their strategic decision making has pounded the Chinese into submission. And so by 1842, Dao Guang's empire is on its knees, trembling. There's cracks everywhere. And that's when he still shows, as I mentioned before, this incredible lack of knowledge of the British. He pens this letter in 1842, and he's like, wait, where is England? Like, why are they selling us opium? How is it that a woman is a sovereign? Is she married? Why are there Indians fighting in their army? I'm like, and so that's what makes it so fascinating to me, because ultimately it's this flaw that brings the Qing to their knees, and they, handily lose the war. And they show up at they're forced to sue for peace, and they show up at the table to sign the Treaty of Nanjing. In this treaty, the British get everything they wanted. They get extraterritorial rights, they get new trading ports, they get rights to Hong Kong, et cetera, et cetera. And so now what we have is the once great Middle Kingdom shoved into the periphery. And, Second Opium War, again, but basically goes the same way, but this time other Western powers jump in to further open up China to trade. And it begins with this diplomatic dispute over a ship called the Arrow. It's known as a pirate ship. Whatever. To me, that is, again, not as interesting, but maybe it is. Y'all can jump in on this, but again, it ends with China defeated again, and China essentially becomes at this point the economic plaything of industrial Western powers as they are forcibly opened to trade, and that's what the Chinese Communist Party refers to as the Century of Humiliation. Yeah. And that's the short version of the story, but ultimately, so fascinating how these miscalculations of who are we and who are they led to this 100-year plus period of getting tossed around and marginalized the once great Middle Kingdom.
Oh, 100%. First of all, great story.
It
Love
was
it.
really well. I
Love it. I think you hit the nail right on the head there when you talked about this idea of like cultural misunderstanding, not really understanding with whom you're trading, with whom you're dealing. I think there's a lot of those traditional Chinese patterns came into play, right? You think back all the way to the Han Dynasty, paying the enemy at the gates to go away, or operating from this position of a superiority, literally and figuratively, and how China, it just seemingly felt like, well, of course we're number one. I mean, we are the celestial kingdom. We are the people of the heavens. And how could it be that we don't kowtow to them? They kowtow to us. And I think one of the things that we didn't talk about at the top that maybe deserves a little, conversation is the idea that England is also, at this time period, a very ethnocentric, we would use the term nationalism now, sort of entity. And when you talk about this tiny little island and its ability to project power literally all over the world, the sun never sets on the British Empire, there's something to be said in terms of that belief of self. And we know, this is not, we're not guessing at this. We know this idea of the white man's burden and the scientific racist ideas that come to really animate the second half of the 19th century, especially out of places like England. China's running headlong into another group of people who are feeling themselves the same way as China is, but these guys are bringing with them the powers and mights of the industrial world in a way that just China couldn't conceive of.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that one of the things we passed over and didn't mention was that Elliot makes this decision to transfer the debt of the opium to the British government. However, once that happens, the debate over war in England quickly shifts to a matter of national honor. Mm-hmm. It's because earlier Eliot's predecessor, William Napier, who was by all accounts an absolute idiot, refused to play by anybody's rules but his own, offends the Chinese all over the place, but he dies. He's killed by a little skirmish between British and Chinese ships, and the people, the British that were there, was like, yeah, he absolutely deserved it. He was 100% in the wrong, but that provided this pretext for, they have dishonored us. Not only are they economically pinching us over here, but now it's a matter of national honor. And if you have to sell a war to the public, that is a much better way to do it.
Oh, totally. Isn't that how we've sold every war? Especially in this country, that like we unite when we feel, we've got a common enemy. I want to talk a little bit, if we can, this beginning of this century of humiliation, because the Opium Wars were devastating to China without a doubt. And the two treaties were horrific in the Chinese eyes, very beneficial in the Western eyes. But I'm not sure the Opium Wars themselves would, if it had just stopped there, been the main cause for the Century of Humiliation. Because there are a few other things that take place that I think had a little bit more impact. And I'm specifically talking about that Taiping Rebellion with what in class we called them Chinese Jesus, because this guy believed he was the Chinese brother of Jesus Christ. Do you know how many people died in the Taiping Rebellion?
Something like 126 million people estimated. I mean, it's if I'm wrong,
I think it's 30.
Yeah, it's the insinuating event that gets the massive amount of Chinese immigration to the United States that ends up being exploited for the railroad building. I mean, this is a cataclysmic event. And again, it's on the heels of, like you talked about, Heimler, this idea of, the Chinese patterns of the mandate of heaven, and how do you read those tea leaves of Dramen's not a word, famine and drought. I just made up. That's how we do. Dramming is the new word.
Just save time. Save time.
Making it up. But I think you have this piece here where you have an outside cultural influence. If we go all the way back to the context at the beginning of the episode, part of the reason the Canton system was created was to keep Christianity out, was to keep foreign influence and ideas out of China. Now these things are coming in. There's this huge cataclysmic rebellion that's going on. And at the same time, I think, Jen, you talked about the Taiping Rebellion. My mind always goes in this moment to this Chinese self-strengthening movement and the failures there. And one of the things that I always like to talk about with my students is this idea of when it comes to the idea of revolutionary change, either you're all in, you actually go through the change process, or you're not in at all. And China wanted to adopt the good, quote unquote, good things that they saw from the British and the other foreign powers, Western powers after these two Opium Wars. Specifically, we're talking military tech and some of the industrial process, but we're going to keep Confucianism. We're going to keep the traditional social hierarchies. We're going to keep the traditional gender roles. These sorts of core elemental pieces of Chinese civilization are not to change. We're just looking at changing some tech and maybe making money a different way. And of course it didn't work. And so this is just another event in this mandate of heaven cycle that's going to be signaling to people like, these guys, the Qing, they don't got it, the goods anymore. They're failing.
Yeah, you know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about Russia in the same way, right? Because, they tried to modernize a little bit, but they won't modernize the entire social system. And that is true, that you don't modernize that social system, that, in your political system, nothing's going to change in the end. And it did. It sucked. It didn't work at all. I think it was a last-ditch effort because that came on the heels of the Taiping Rebellion. And then we have the next one, which is, first of all, though, I think these would be an awesome name of a new superhero group, the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. How could that... That is the next group in the Avengers. I am telling you, we are missing we can make a movie on this.
No Marvel.
Yeah.
Are you a DC fan? You don't even know. And the Boxer Rebellion. And again, it's really funny. It's not really funny. It's actually really sad. But, it's a rebellion against the incursion of Christianity, right? And they start with the killing of Chinese Christians, and then they're going to kill Christian missionaries, and then they're going to lay siege to the diplomat quarters in Beijing, which is only going to infuriate the Western powers even more. And the big kicker here, though, is that the Empress threw all in with the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. And when that rebellion was put down, peace out, Qing. Peace out.
I don't know. I think the last thing that, as we talk about the aftermath of the Opium War here, the last thing that comes to mind is the fact that in the Boxer Rebellion, in that moment of changeover of powers in Asia, you have a group of people on the ascent. You've got Japan, and Japan represents a group of people who did go all in on change, who did do the thing that China was unwilling to do after Perry shows up, and it becomes very clear. And this is, again, post-Opium War, so there's some context all of a sudden for like, who are these enemies at the gate? However, Japan goes through this full cultural changeover. I mean, they really destroy everything they had been to become the West. And I think the last of the great humiliating moments of the 19th century, early 20th century for China is also the coming out party for Japan in a lot of ways. And I think there's just something to be seen there in that moment of just like, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's right. I think obviously there's a lot of discontent in Japan when Japan goes through this process of changing over its culture and westernization. However, the proof is in the pudding there. Japan shows up and they are not humiliated. Right? They are routinely not humiliated by the West in a way that China is.
Yeah. They show up to China and decide they want to test the efficacy of that self-strengthening movement, and they slap them in the face with their Meiji Restoration, and they lose that war.
It's like a fish slap in the face, not even like an open hand. Like this thing took him out.
This was a fish slap, indeed.
Poor China. And then it's only going to get worse from here.
Yeah.
And every single time they try to fix something, it don't work.
Yeah. I mean, even when the quote unquote century of humiliation ends and the communists come to power, there's still the great leap forward and the cultural revolution, to say nothing of the 80s as well. So I mean, I think this is like one of those endlessly fascinating sort of things, and really appreciate you, Heimler, coming on and milking those brain cows with us and getting in there with some of that sort of stuff. Part of the reason we knew you wanted to talk about this is one of our students was listening to one of your AP World History prep sessions for the last AP exam. And I think you'd made a comment on Mike, just like, hey, this is something I'd love to get a chance to talk more about. And this student came running back into class and was like, hey, you guys should get with Heimler and talk about the story. He wants to talk about it. And I was like, yeah, we're actually getting ready to pod this thing. Yeah. So couldn't thank you more for coming in here and dropping that knowledge on us.
Yeah,
man. I love it. I'm so glad to be here, and thanks for all y'all are doing and having me on. I appreciate it.
So if students are unfamiliar with you and the work that you're doing out there, maybe just real fast, where can they find you and kind of what is Heimler's history as we get ready to close this thing out?
Yeah, I make videos on YouTube to help students study for their AP courses. And well, not all of them. I don't do AP physics, but histories and government. And so it's Heimler's History on YouTube. And I half-heartedly keep up with the other social medias as well. So YouTube is the place to be. And so if you want to come by and get those brain cows milked, I am always willing and ready.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you again, listeners, for joining us today. Hopefully you thoroughly enjoyed our trek down the Opium Wars road. If you do like us and like what you heard, Matt, what can they do?
All right, so you can go check us out. We're wide on all of the various podcast networks. So anywhere you can get on the internet and get to a podcast, you can find us: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Like Heimler said, half-heartedly on the socials. I don't even know if we can say half-heartedly. It's like a 1/32 second or something like that on the socials. But definitely check us out on your podcast. I think this is our season finale for this season. When we're coming back here for the next season, we're going to be dipping our toes into some other historical events. We have been a world history podcast now for almost 50 episodes.
High five.
However, both of us, Jen and I, neither one of us are going to be teaching AP World History this upcoming school year, unfortunately. However, we are going to be delving into some other topics. I think we announced last year I've been doing some stuff with AP Euro, so we'll have some more European history stories. I will be making the move over to AP US history, and so we're going to definitely get in there and get some US history going as well. And Jen, you are going to be teaching AP Human Geo.
I am teaching AP Human Geo.
So we're going to try to get a little bit of a broader range of story to tell as we start to move into some new educational environs. So next season, we'll still have all of our world history stories for you, but get ready for a little bit more as well. And as always, we want to thank our friends over at Abington Ridge Music Collective for the intro and outro music. You can check them out on SoundCloud. And past that, Heimler, anything you want to say on the way out the door?
Oh man, just that I love you guys, and
we love you.
I think they should all leave a comment and a rating on your podcast, because that helps, doesn't it?
That's right. Hey, look at you.
The algorithm thing?
Yeah, the algorithm. Yeah, you just comment for the algorithm. You
got to feed that hairy algorithm. So
that's right.
Leave that review, baby. Leave that review.
Look at this. Yeah, that's why we got the pros on the mic. All right, guys. Well, till next time, thank you very much. Bye.
Stay curious.
Bye.